Welcome back, everyone. As promised, we are so pleased to have the director of White Noise with us to answer some questions about this remarkable film. Hi, Daniel.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be
Yeah,
here.
good to see you. And we also have our incredible and talented director of programming, Derek Horn, with us, who will participate in the Q&A. Welcome both.
Thank you, Deb, for sponsoring this wonderful film. Thanks for your interest in it.
I was happy to do it.
All right, so Daniel, wow, we have a lot to talk about. What a very important film. We were so happy to include in our festival this year because clearly this is a very timely topic that keeps happening. It doesn't seem to go away. And you know, I've shaved my head today just for this so I can look like a skinhead, although I'm not in your film was so intense. When I first watched it, I remember thinking, "Oh, I'm so resentful that I just spent 90 minutes of my life giving my attention to these three people and allowing them to sell vitamins and their point of views. And I just added to that, right? I mean, I've already had 4 years of Trump, you know, crammed down my throat and, taking all of our attention. But obviously it was such an excellently made documentary and it haunted me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so that's really the sign of an effective documentary. And I realized, so I only had to spend 90 minutes with this, but you spent 4 years with this topic and these people and, you know, knowing your background, you're Jewish, your grandparents were Holocaust survivors. What was it like for you spending these 4 years in this kind of environment, like with some of these, you know, what I would call poisonous sort of opinions? Did you have to detox? What was your method of dealing with this?
So it was a sweeping 4-year investigation across 5 countries, 12 states. You know, I really dedicated my life to this project, and I love The Atlantic, but there were never a lot of resources. I mean, this was really made in the spirit of independent filmmaking. I'm the director, the co-producer, the cinematographer. I also helped edit the film. I edited a lot of the montage sequences. So, you know, I was fully immersed in this world, both in the US and abroad. You know, I don't know that I had a method of detoxing or dealing with it. I think I'm young and was even younger then. And my method was to really just commit myself fully to the work and to try to expose, you know, the really unsettling trends that we were seeing in society. And, you know, I think a few of them are very clear in the film. One is the slow mainstreaming of racism, how things go from the fringe into the mainstream. And then I think the other, just like the intoxicating appeal of celebrity, that these people are racist, but they're really celebrities, they're influencers. And now on social media, you can make a brand out of anything. You can, you know, get famous for something of your own credit or due, like being a great director or a great artist. You can also get famous by selling racism, selling conspiracy in the way that Mike Cernovich does so effectively in the film, going from being an out of work lawyer to now, you know, one of the, you know, more influential voices on the far right. So, you know, my tactic was to just be in it as deep as I can to get the deepest access that I possibly could, and then deal with the repercussions afterwards. Now the film is done and I'm left to consider the psychological toll it might have left. I'm not quite sure what it left, but it was a very intense 4-year experience and one that I continue to make sense of.
Yeah, and you know, I do appreciate that you just kind of let them speak for themselves and have their opinions. You didn't really take a slant to the film. And I think it is important for us to hear other people's opinions and have civil discourse in society. You know, I believe in free speech. I'm not a fan of cancel culture. And as a programmer for cultural arts organization, I definitely believe in freedom of expression, although, you know, when it does not instigate any sort of violence or harm. But what's interesting is, you know, I must say, there are things I admire about them, quite frankly, in terms of that they can be deep thinkers. I admire people who kind of philosophize for themselves and try to think things through their own logic, whether it's a skewed iconoclastic logic. But I admire seeing their thought processes of where they came to their opinions. And although it's interesting because on the flip side of being deep thinkers, it's like you said, they're not necessarily in it for the deep conviction of those opinions. They're either making money off of it, like Mike, or in it for fame, like Lauren, or just the ego of it all, like Richard. So it's a sort of interesting flip side, but I do appreciate that you let them just speak for themselves.
Yeah, and that was a controversial approach to take. So when we started the film, you know, I'm a journalist by training, although I've been making films for about 10 years. And, you know, the approach in documentary now is increasingly to have a hard-edged perspective, to be kind of more of an activist, what you'd call an activist film. And in this space, that's what you typically see is you see a series of expert interviews and someone telling you that this is a film about systemic racism. It's a film about, you know, how America is racist to the bone. And you know, my view is that by making a deeply reported piece where you're in the trenches with these people, you're actually creating something of much more value. I mean, the film is a primary source document. I mean, I was the one person that was with them in all of these locations across 4 years. It's something that I think could be studied for years. And, you know, I don't mean to criticize other documentary forms, but it's also easier to do something that's driven by archive, driven by expert interviews. This is a very difficult approach to pull off in documentary, to do what's called a follow film and to execute it in a way that reveals something new and interesting. And, you know,
yeah, because, you know, even after the documentary, I went and read your article on The Atlantic that gave even more information about where they are now. And it's so fascinating when asked, you know, if they're all following Trump, they all have their own answers. And I think Lauren's response was, oh, it's boring. It doesn't interest me anymore. I'm thinking, wow, she just so easily gave that all up, you know. How serious?
So it's tricky because they believe, you know, they are believers. And I think it's important to understand that, like, these views have tremendous power. They're racist, they're nasty, they're anti-Semitic, they're conspiratorial. And most importantly, they're going from, you know, what used to be the fringe, which used to be outside the window of what was acceptable, slowly but surely into the mainstream of the conservative movement. And that's very clear, and the film documents that in real time. You know, that being said, it does try to understand their psychology, and that is a controversial approach. The film has done really well, and the only negative reviews we have are exactly what we knew we would get, which is people saying, don't give a platform to them, don't amplify them in any way. The people who love the film love it for the reason you said. It says by amplifying them, you understand them and see basically how stupid and misguided their whole project is. But I think there is a tendency now sometimes to treat viewers like babies and not think that they're able to decipher when watching a film. And I think, you know, if you're patient and you watch this movie, and we've done it across all audiences, you know, diverse audiences, ideologically, racially, and it's very clear when you watch the film to the end that these are deeply misguided people. They're so hypocritical. They contradict themselves at every turn. And I would argue that this film takes them down way more than the opposite documentary approach where you're wagging the finger, because you see that in public, they're these strong, powerful figures, but in private, they're quite weak, very, very needy, and pretty much lost in the world.
I found it fascinating, like following Lauren through the documentary in Europe, you know, the way she kind of manipulated the homeless people. But then afterwards in the car, I could see she almost had doubts. She was kind of trying to think, well, I'm a caring person, you know, but it doesn't mean we can't have rules. And, you know, some of her opinions were fascinating. I mean, she's fascinating and frustrating, because like she'll say something profound like democracy is similar to gang rape. And I thought, well, I guess she has some of a logical point there with how she arrived at that opinion, but clearly she's misguided, like you said. But
I think there are so many moments, sorry to interrupt briefly, but there's so many moments in the film where you hope that Lauren will change.
I know.
She's dealing with so much sexual harassment, and I wrote a story that goes beyond what you see in the film to explain how explicit it is what the men are doing to her in the movement. You know, she's so young when she got famous, and there's the hope that maybe she'll recognize the error and change, but unfortunately she didn't. And at the end of the film, she ends up with a non-white partner, is embarrassed by that decision, and, you know, where she's a conservative commentator, she's still making far-right films. So she didn't learn her lesson, and you should feel frustrated watching it because it's unfortunate.
Right. Yeah. And then, you know, with Mike Cernovich, what I thought was interesting was I felt there was a crucial piece of information missing from the documentary, because other than his repulsive misogynistic opinions on how to treat women, I did appreciate that he disavowed the Nazism and Nazi salutes, but it did not mention his part in the Pizzagate scandal. Like, he played a part in propagating that message, which could have led to people getting killed when they showed up at the pizza place with a gun. And I thought that's my biggest problem with these people. They can philosophize all they want, but when they say things that actually cause harm to people, I mean, how do they sleep at night, especially with the lies? How can they just blatantly say a lie? And with Mike Cernovich, I just wondered if it was important to give that piece of information in the documentary. I found myself looking on Wikipedia about him afterwards, and I didn't realize how big of a part he played in that as a co-host of the Alex Jones InfoWars show. And I thought, how would he like it if I publicized, we know he has a wife named Shauna, and he lives somewhere on, I think, Sunshine Avenue or whatever was in the film.
Sunshine and Sunshine.
How would he like it if I said something about him and people showed up on his doorstep with a gun,
Yeah.
Did that ever come up in the documentary?
All of these things came up in conversation. I mean, it was a really robust conversation at The Atlantic. We went through hundreds of edits. At one point, everyone in New York City was giving me notes on this film, basically. Pizzagate is tricky because a lot of people had a role in it. Mike didn't. This is not to exonerate Mike in any way. He's been behind many dangerous conspiracy theories, but he helped mainstream Pizzagate. He didn't create Pizzagate. So he was tweeting #Pizzagate and was kind of raising questions about a potential pedophilia ring at Comet Pizza in Washington, D.C. Of course, this is completely bunk. My friend was a waitress there. They don't even have a basement in Comet Pizza. And of course, a man came from North Carolina with a gun, shot some rounds into the ceiling. And like you said, people could have died. Cernovich clearly played a role, but we were in a film, you have to make very tough decisions. And we wanted to establish him and all the other characters in the most efficient way possible through montage sequences. And the Sick Hillary meme goes back to Mike Cernovich. He helped create it. He brought it mainstream. He brought all of the energy that really created the idea that Hillary, then a candidate, was somehow sick and incompetent, that ended up on Sean Hannity's show and eventually came out of the president's mouth.
And he's never had to apologize for that.
He's never had to apologize.
She doesn't have Parkinson's.
She does not have Parkinson's, did not have Parkinson's then. And it was a tough decision between the two. And we decided that Sick Hillary actually was a more effective use of his power. In a way, it showed his abilities more than Pizzagate, because Pizzagate, he was one of 100 people.
Yeah, how ironic that now he's selling nutritional supplements when he can't even correctly diagnose someone.
And you see that often with the far right. Matt Gaetz, who's a congressman from Florida, was one of the main people pushing QAnon, that there's a Democratic pedophilia ring, that Democrats are sleeping with underage women.
I was going to ask you, are three subjects QAnon members?
I don't know if they are, but in the case of Matt Gaetz, and he's adjacent to this world, Matt Gaetz just got caught sleeping with a 17-year-old.
Exactly. So I'm hoping that's your sequel. Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I don't know who else. Duncan Hunter. There could be your three for your sequel.
And these guys, Matt Gaetz is an extension of Lauren ending. All of these people contradicting themselves, because it's easy to publicly espouse something on social media and privately think you can behave differently. And they all do that. And to your previous point, just to close out, they think that they can say violent ideas without those having violent consequences. And that's why we chose to end the film in the way that we did, showing the attacks in New Zealand, in Pittsburgh, in El Paso. You have to understand that there's a direct link from believing in a white ethno-state, believing that the US, Europe, Australia are white countries and deserve to be white countries, and the violent terrorist attacks that we've seen. And then we ended, with going back to the three subjects in a fair journalistic way and saying, hate crimes are rising, what do you think? And all of them basically say the exact same thing. If anyone committed a crime, it's because they disobeyed me. They weren't listening to me. Yeah, they won't take any responsibility for all that they've unleashed.
And what's so fascinating is all three of them, it's almost like they don't realize the reality they're creating. I mean, Richard wanted to be a theater director. This is all one big imaginary theatrical play for him, and you could just hit reset and the game starts over. And I'm wondering, it reminds me of the actor in the Capitol riot on the 6th, the shaman guy from Arizona. Wasn't he a failed actor? Do you think there's something about the far right that attracts these really dramatic people?
Well, this is the famous example that Hitler was a failed painter, and that if only he got into art school, we could have avoided all the terror that we saw 70 years ago. Richard was always a second-rate everything. He went to the best prep school in Texas, was a second-rate football player, was a second-rate theater director. He's highly educated like the other people, upper middle class like the other subjects, but he never really became successful enough in what he was doing until he became a demagogue, until he became a far-right leader. And I think, hearing that line about being a theater director, it clicks for a lot of people that, yes, he believes it, but there's also a key element of performance in all of this. And for someone like Richard, who's never been good enough, who's never actually to his father, proven his abilities, his father has never thought he was worth anything, achieving this level of fame and notoriety, even in the most repulsive way possible, made him feel important, made him feel like he was worth something. And I think, just quickly to your point, I think people who have, this might sound controversial, but who have more depressive tendencies, who are more romantic, are drawn to these sorts of movements because they make you feel like you're part of something larger. A lot of people struggle with, the mundane nature of day-to-day life, that, things are sometimes not interesting. You're not fighting a civilizational war, and you're not, fundamentally rewriting the social contract. And, these ideologies are dark and twisted and racist and violent, but they also make you feel good. They're really emotional, and you find a community in them. You feel like you're part of something larger. So if you're feeling that void, you're depressed, you're lost, this can, in a way, like other drugs, fill that, but it's temporary. And when you meet these people 3, 4, 5 years later, like I do now, they're just back in the place where they started. They're depressed, they're lost again, and many of them regret, ever taking part in this movement.
It's interesting, Daniel, your bio says that your work centers on intimate stories of insular, fringe, or underrepresented communities. Why do you think you're drawn to these stories and these type of people?
I've done a lot of stories like this. I did one on a far-right Christian media organization. It's one of my favorites, called Church Militant. And to give away the film, it's, a fake news operation. They're outing priests for being gay. They're putting out just complete misinformation. And then halfway through the film, you find out that the founder, Michael Voris, actually is formerly gay, was gay in his 20s and 30s. And when his mother was on her deathbed, she said, "Michael, I never believed that you were gay. You were traumatized because we had a difficult home. I forgive you. I'm sorry." She dies. And the rest of his life, he devoted himself to spreading far-right ideas and ideology, and now lives as a celibate man as a way to atone for his sins of being gay. Obviously, all of this is the point of what I'm saying is that the theatrics that people play in their heads as a way to justify their sense of place in the world, the desperate lengths that people go to find their sense of place in the world, is something that really interests me. That humans, by nature are confused, and the world is only getting more confusing. And I think traditionally we would latch onto things like religion. Church membership used to be a lot higher, and other forms of organization, political activism, all of those things are declining. So now, in 2021 and in the years and decades to come, we're finding all of these weirder ways that people are finding identity, whether it's through QAnon, through white nationalism, through CrossFit, through all sorts of things. And some of them are not damaging. Going to SoulCycle might be as a waste of money, but it's not going to hurt anyone. And some of them are damaging, like becoming a member of the alt-right. And I think, I'm just interested in that impulse that humans have to belong and to fit in.
Why can't people just become film festival members? That's a healthy thing to belong to, right? Join the cult of film festivals. So
They
Dan,
should.
where can we see all of your other really cool short videos that you've made before this first feature film? Are they on your own website?
Yeah, you could see them on the Atlantic's website. You can see them on my website, daniellombroso.com. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter. And I now work at And I
New
now work at the New Yorker.
Yeah.
So I have some exciting shorts coming probably in about 4 or 5 months.
Great. So you're at the New Yorker now because you're no longer at the Atlantic. And boy, you know, they really knocked it out of the park with their very first feature documentary. And it sounds like, are they not going to make any more, or will they maybe revisit that in the future?
So I love the Atlantic. I was there for many years. Unfortunately, they decided to eliminate the video department. I think part of it was about COVID, but also, the financial situation of documentary filmmaking is tough, and it's only getting tougher. It's really easy to make celebrity profiles and sell those to Netflix. That sort of thing does really well on streaming services. If you want to make a deeply reported piece of investigative journalism like White Noises or a character study, it's not the sort of thing that gets bought for a lot of money. It's not a sustainable business model. And it's becoming harder and harder for institutions like the Atlantic to say, why invest? Film is expensive. Why invest all of this money in film when we can be doing it in writing or podcast or other forms? So,
But
the New Yorkers,
you didn't have an expense account when you were having to travel all around the world.
they covered the film fully, and I've worked with them closely on the rollout of the film. Yeah. The point being is just that the trends in the industry can be depressing at times, and the sort of stuff that gets backed financially are things like celebrity profiles, are things that are lighter, things that feel more like content than they do like deeply reported films. So, there's always going to be a home for it. I found a new home for that at the New Yorker. They're very supportive of the work that I'm doing. And White Noise, will always be a collector's item. It's the one film that the Atlantic ever made. I hope one day they'll make more films, and when they decide to do that, they'll know where to find me.
Well, thank you for doing all the hard work, Daniel. And thank you for joining us, and good luck on your next project. We'll see you again in the future.
Thanks so much. That was a lot of fun.
Take care.
Bye.